Good morning. It's a really big honor to be here, to be on this panel with these fellow panelists, and to hear someone like former Foreign Secretary Castañeda this morning. And so I appreciate the Cato Institute and want to thank them for the invitation to be with you here today. As Mary said, I used to be on the City Council in El Paso, Texas. I was born and raised there. El Paso, for those of you who don't know, sits across the Rio Grande from Juarez, Mexico. And we're really two parts of the largest binational community in the world. There are about 3 million people who live in this pass or this valley in El Paso, Juarez. Our economies, our cultures, our histories, our families are all interconnected and interdependent. For example, about $70 billion in U.S.-Mexico trade passes through our ports of entry every year. That's about 20% of all trade between the two countries. There are 7 million crossers who, in pedestrian or vehicle lines, cross our international bridges every year. And the Juarezans and other Mexican nationals who come over, who come north, spend about $1.5 billion in El Paso's economy every year. And conservatively speaking, and this is an estimate from the Federal Reserve Board Dallas branch, there are about 50,000 jobs in a city of 800,000 in El Paso, 50,000 jobs that are dependent on all that cross-border trade, commerce, and retail customers who cross those bridges. And the incalculable part of our relationship, the families, the culture, the history, is obviously harder to quantify, but is just as or more important. So when in 2008, more than 1,600 people were brutally murdered in Juarez in the most horrific fashion, the most terroristic manner conceivable, everyone took note. The previous year, in 2007, a little over 300 people had been killed in Juarez, and that was considered a significant spike in violence from the year before. And so many of us began to ask, why is this happening? What's going on? Because from a moral imperative, when people are dying in your community, or a self-interested motive of your economy and the economic and jobs driver in your community is at stake, you want to find out what's going on. And it became obvious to many of us, and probably obvious to everyone in this room, that the drug war, the consumption and demand for drugs in the United States, the policies of prohibition here, and then the complementary war that was launched by President Calderon in 2006 had a lot to do with what was going on. So in 2009, as Mary described, when a citizen commission came forward and presented a resolution asking that the governments of the United States and Mexico do something to put an end to this problem and to stop the deaths and killing and terrorism in Ciudad Juarez, the City Council considered it, and I offered an amendment to the resolution that we have an open and honest dialogue about ending the war on drugs. And that's about as much as I knew about it. I'd never thought about the drug war. It was at best an abstraction. I knew there were narcos in Ciudad Juarez. There had been spikes in violence in the past as I grew up in the community, but they always seemed to pass and were almost like acts of nature or God that you waited to move along, and then life continued as normal. And so when this resolution came forward and we offered this amendment, it was surprisingly adopted and passed by the entire City Council of the City of El Paso, all 8 of us. And you all probably know how politics work in your hometown. For 8 of us to agree on what to name a street or to what rate to set the taxes in our community is a major battle. So for us to, all 8 of us, agree on perhaps the most politically charged topic of our time really says something about the level of desperation that we felt in El Paso and Ciudad Juarez, and tells you about the vacuum in leadership that we found from Washington, D.C. and Mexico City. You don't want your city councils weighing in on issues like this typically, but in the absence of any other leadership, we chose to do it. And as Mary said, we received a lot of pressure, most notably from our congressman, to stop this. And the threat was, and it's the threat that we heard the former Foreign Secretary talk about in Mexico, and we know other Latin American leaders face this, the threat in El Paso, Texas, the 3rd poorest city in the United States, One of the zip codes I represent, the average per capita income is $6,700 a year. The threat was your federal funding will be cut off for the projects in your districts, in your city, if you continue with this proposal. Mind you, it was just to discuss it. It was not, we don't have the unilateral authority to legalize marijuana in El Paso, Texas. We just wanted the governments of these two countries and in our communities to have this discussion, because obviously this was an input to the violence. We lost that vote when we tried to override the mayor's veto, as Mary pointed out, and life went on. And one of the cold comforts offered by the congressman was, there were actually two. One is, this is just bad people killing bad people. And he compared it to a movie that I haven't seen, but he said it's like this movie, The Last Man Standing. We're just going to let them kill each other off, and ultimately there will be one left standing, and then life can go on. And the other thing he said, and this is January of 2009, he said, give this about 6 months and it'll blow over. Well, obviously it didn't blow over. There were 1,600 killed in 2008. There were 2,700 murdered in 2009. 3,111 murdered in 2010. So it obviously got much, much worse. And this was despite the intervention of the federal authorities in terms of the Army. This was despite firing police chiefs and hiring new police chiefs. This was despite every single effort made by the municipal and national governments to try to stem the violence in Ciudad Juarez. And the question came up earlier with Mr. Castañeda about whether there was any real fear of Mexico being a failed state and whether the cartels ever really assumed any territory. And I probably agree with his contention that prior to 2006, that was not the case. But I can just tell you anecdotally that the mayor of Ciudad Juarez lived in El Paso, Texas, Mayor Reyes Feliz, once this drug war started after 2006. And you have to really think, when in human history has the elected head of a city not lived in the city that he's there to run, and not only not lived in that city, but lived in an entirely different country altogether. And that was the case in Juarez during the term of Mayor Reyes Feliz. When you're speaking in such large numbers, 1,600, 2,700, 3,100, these people, these lives can become abstractions to some of us, and they certainly are for the federal governments of the United States and Mexico. And when you have the Attorney General of Mexico, Medina Mora, saying that all of these deaths represent the weakness, the decomposition, and the deterioration of the cartels, when you have his counterpart here, or actually the head of the DEA in the United States, come to El Paso, Texas, where all this is happening, and say all these murders are a sign of success, when you hear this kind of Orwellian doublespeak where death equals victory, then you really have to question your most basic assumptions about who's leading, who's following, and what you can expect from the policies in place. And that's why, interestingly enough, the border, a city council member, an entire city council in El Paso, Texas, decided and basically were forced to take the lead on a very controversial issue. But it's an issue whose time has come, very clearly, given this conference, given the Gallup poll that was cited earlier, given the comments by President Calderon, the person who launched this drug war, who very recently said that we need to start exploring market alternatives. It's very clear where we're going. The case that makes this more human and less of an abstraction for me is the case of Raul Ramirez, who in 2009 was traveling with his father in the Anapra neighborhood. My wife, Amy, who's here with me, and I both live in Sunset Heights, which is a neighborhood in El Paso that was founded by Porfirio Diaz loyalists during the Mexican Revolution, which, by the way, was planned, headquartered, and launched from El Paso, Texas. And the Battle of Juarez was one of the truly decisive battles during that revolution. And these loyalists who left Mexico and Juarez came and settled Sunset Heights, where we live. And in fact, we live right off of Porfirio Diaz Street, probably one of the few neighborhoods in the world named after the former dictator. And from that street, I can see the Anapra neighborhood where Raul Ramirez was driving on November 13th, 2009 with his father. And Raul was a true fronterizo. He lived his life on both sides of the border. His parents lived in Juarez. He spent the school week in El Paso going to Glen Cove Elementary in El Paso, Texas, and then on the weekends would spend that time with his family. And as they were driving through the Anapra neighborhood, gunmen approached his father's car in a separate car, opened fire, killing his father almost instantly. And as the car rolled to a stop in a traffic circle that I can see from my house, Raul opens the door. He's 7 years old, opens the door and runs for his life. And after the gunmen have checked to make sure that his father's dead, they pursue him, shoot him in the back, and he dies literally hundreds of feet from the U.S.-Mexico border. So when the drug war and these deaths and the horrible terrorism that we see happening in Mexico, and even the deaths in our U.S. inner cities become abstractions, those of us who live in the border and see this happening day in and day out know that it's not, and know that it's one of the most cataclysmic, most terrible things to happen in our community in its entire history. And that's why we have chosen to speak out. That's why I'm here today speaking to you, and that's why I will do everything in my power to end this drug war, because it's literally killing our cities. And I thank you for the opportunity to be here today. Thanks.
Hey Charlotte County, this is Charlotte County COPWATCH, and I wanted to explain what fair use is. You can use pieces of news articles if you're doing it for news reporting, you have commentary, and you're doing it for education purposes. So that's what fair use is, as you can see right here. Another reason why I wanted to make this video is to let you know I have just joined with Patreon. A nice thing with Patreon, I make no money on YouTube. They took the money away years ago, and so this is another way to give, and it's a nice thing too, because you can give monthly. You can give $1, $5, $10, whatever. I do 4 to 5 hours a day on trying to wake the sheep up on how corrupt it is and different ways that you can fight the corruption. So Patreon is a way that you can do it, and then of course the old way is still there. Donate to Charlotte County COPWATCH with PayPal or credit card. So keep that in mind. 4 to 5 hours a day. I make no money, but the corruption happened to me and I'm sick of it, so I'm trying to wake people up. But my wife would love it if if we could get some help out there. There's 47,000 subscribers. Just think if each one of you subscribers just gave let's say actually yes, $1 a month. 47,000 subscribers gave $1 a month. That would be awesome. That's not going to happen. But anyways, that would be great if it did happen. But do the math in your head. Just think about it. Like I said, 4 to 5 hours a day. I get no money from YouTube. YouTube has gone nuts. You can't do anything anymore. They're taking the money away everywhere. So these are a couple different ways that you can still help out with all this time that I put in. And as you know, I'm in a special situation where, at least I can do it. 4 to 5 hours a day. We have a cleaning company during the day. That's what allows me to do this, and we're debt-free. So this is my hobby. I don't go fishing and all that other crap. I try to save the world. So help me out to make the wife happy, man. In fact, if you guys did give $1 a day, and there was 47,000 of you, and you did it, and each of you gave $1, and that was every month, oh my God, yes, I could quit. I could start suing them. Another idea too that we have is, if I got, some funds, we could actually contact everyone that has been ticketed and or arrested and put in jail and start sending them postcards to let them know we're here, and to see if everything went all right, and if it didn't, find out their story. So we could even do more investigations and more lawsuits. Lawsuits take money. So just think about that. 47,000 of you so far right now. $1 a day. $1 a month on Patreon, or $5 a month Patreon, 10, 20, whatever. Just do the math in your head. Help out. This is a lot of work every single day. Thanks.